I thought money could fix loneliness. I was wrong about that. But by the time I figured it out, I was already wearing his ring. His name was Richard Hale, 51, silver at the temples, the kind of man who gets called distinguished instead of old because he has enough money to make the difference. He ran a real estate development firm out of Chicago that had his name on 3 buildings downtown. He was calm, controlled, and completely certain of himself in a way I'd spent my whole life mistaking for strength. We met at a fundraiser I'd been brought to by a friend. He asked me one question: what do you actually want from your life? And I gave him an honest answer instead of a polished one. And he looked at me like I'd done something surprising. I was 29. My mother's medical bills had been sitting in a drawer for 8 months. I was tired in a way that sleep wasn't fixing. He proposed 4 months later. I said yes. The wedding was in April. Cream roses, 90 guests, a venue with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. I wore a dress that cost more than 3 months of my old salary and stood in front of a mirror at noon thinking, this is the part where I'm supposed to feel something. I felt the weight of the dress. I felt the shoes. I walked down the aisle and smiled the whole way and meant none of it, and hated myself for that in a quiet, constant way that I carried into the marriage like a piece of luggage I couldn't check. Richard's house, our house, he corrected me every time I called it that, was a 4,000 square foot brownstone in Lincoln Park. Beautiful in the way that showrooms are beautiful. Everything chosen carefully, nothing chosen for comfort. The bedroom had a California king that felt like sleeping in a hotel every night. And I mean that in the worst possible way. The kind of hotel where you wake up at 3 in the morning and it takes a second to remember where you are. He worked until 9 most nights, sometimes later. He came to bed without turning on the light, which I initially read as considerate and eventually understood was just preference. He didn't need to see me to go to sleep. We ate dinner together maybe 4 nights a week. He talked about work in the measured way of a man reporting to a board. I listened and asked questions because I was good at that, had always been good at making other people feel heard, and he never once asked if I was. By month 3, I had a cleaning service, a car I still didn't quite believe was mine, and an apartment's worth of silence that followed me from room to room. I called my mother on Tuesday afternoons and told her things were good. She'd say, "You sound tired, honey." I'd say, "I'm fine." His name was Daniel Park. He worked in Richard's firm as a senior project architect, the person who actually made the buildings Richard put his name on. He was 34, Korean American, and had this quality of paying attention to the physical world that Richard never had. He noticed weather. He noticed light. He'd stop mid-conversation to look at the way afternoon sun was hitting a building across the street. And the first time he did it in front of me, I felt something move in my chest, like something that had been still for too long. I met him at a firm dinner in June. He sat across from me and talked to me like I was a person instead of an accessory, which sounds like a low bar, but was, at that point in my marriage, everything. He asked what I'd studied. I told him art history, and he didn't make the face people make, the one that says interesting choice, meaning bad choice. He said, "So you actually see things? That's useful." I thought about that sentence for a week. July arrived hot, and Richard left for a 2-week trip to Dubai for a deal that had been in negotiation for months. He told me on a Monday morning, while buttoning his cufflinks, not looking at me. I said, "I'll be fine." He said, "I know you will." Not warmly, just factually. I stood in our big, empty kitchen after the car took him away and listened to the refrigerator hum and understood something I'd been avoiding for 3 months. This was not a marriage that was going through a rough patch. This was what the marriage was. Daniel texted me that Wednesday. Richard had forwarded my number months ago for project logistics, and he said he was sorry to bother me, but there were documents he needed Richard to sign before Friday, and he couldn't reach him. I said I'd pass the message along. He said, "While I have you, are you okay? You seemed off at the dinner last month." I stared at my phone for a long time. I said, "I'm okay." He said, "Okay." Then, "There's a good architecture exhibition at the Art Institute this week if you need something to do. No pressure, just information." I went on Thursday. He was there, which I had told myself I was not hoping for and was obviously hoping for, and we walked through the whole thing slowly, and he talked about buildings the way people talk about living things, what they need, how they breathe, what happens when you get the structure wrong and try to hide it with surface detail. I felt like he was talking about something else the entire time. We got coffee after in the museum cafe and stayed for 2 hours. He made me laugh 3 times. Real laughs, the kind that catch you off guard. On the walk out, he held the door and his hand grazed the small of my back for half a second, automatic and light, and he immediately moved it away. I drove home with both hands on the wheel and my heart doing something it had no business doing. I want to be clear about what I did with that feeling. I put it away. I took it out, looked at it, understood exactly what it was and exactly why it couldn't be anything, and I put it away. I was married. I had made a choice. The choice was bad, but it was made, and I was not someone who handled things the wrong way. I put it away. I just couldn't seem to keep it there. Richard came home from Dubai on a Thursday evening, tan, rested, impeccably dressed. He kissed my cheek at the door and said the trip had gone well and asked what I'd been up to. I said, "Not much. Went to an exhibition at the Art Institute." He said, "With who?" I said, "Alone." He looked at me for a moment, just a moment. Then he said, "Good, you should get out more." Something about the way he said it made me feel, briefly, like I'd missed something, like there was a layer underneath the sentence that I hadn't located. But Richard always seemed like he knew more than he said, and I'd learned to stop trying to find the bottom of him. The thing that broke it open wasn't romantic. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't even a conversation, exactly. It was a night in August. Richard and I were at a firm event, a rooftop thing, warm air, city lights spread out below us, and I was standing with a glass of wine watching people, which is what I did at these events because it was the only role I'd found that was genuinely mine. Richard was across the room. Daniel arrived late. He found me at the railing. We talked. We were careful. We were always careful. We had an unspoken agreement about being careful. And at some point, I said something that made him look at me with that specific look he had, the one that was just attention, just full presence, nothing performed about it. And across the room, Richard was watching. Not casually, not the way a husband glances over to locate his wife. He was watching in a still, deliberate way of someone observing something that is going according to plan. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in the California King and looked at the ceiling and turned that image over until I found the edge of it. The next morning, while Richard was in his office, I did something I had never done in 11 months of marriage. I went to his desk. He kept a locked drawer. I'd seen the key on his ring a dozen times and never once questioned it. I found it, and I opened it, and I stood there for a long time looking at what was inside. A folder. Documents. The first one was a profile, detailed, thorough, my financial situation before we met, my mother's debt, my apartment, my salary, my entire context laid out like research. The second set of documents were from a private investigator, 6 months old. They'd been commissioned 2 months into our marriage. Not because he suspected me of anything, because he was watching. At the back of the folder, a single handwritten note in Richard's careful script. 2 sentences. "She'll find her way to someone warmer. I want to see how long she takes to stop feeling guilty about it." I put everything back exactly as I found it. I closed the drawer, I walked to the kitchen and stood at the counter and let myself feel all of it at once. The 11 months, the California King in its hotel silence, the refrigerator hum and the Tuesday phone calls, Daniel's hand on my back for half a second, the rooftop look, all of it. And I let it be real. He hadn't married me despite knowing I didn't love him. He'd married me because of it. The loneliness wasn't a side effect. It was the design. I thought money could fix loneliness. What I hadn't understood was that some people collect loneliness in others the way different people collect art. They want to own it, watch it, keep it in a beautiful house and observe it from across the room. I called a lawyer that afternoon. I called Daniel that evening. I didn't explain everything. I just said, "I need to tell you something, and then I have to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." He said, "Okay." Outside, Chicago was doing what Chicago does in August, loud and golden and completely indifferent to anyone's interior life. For the first time in 11 months, I didn't mind the noise. I spent 11 months mistaking a beautiful cage for a home. I thought security meant safety. It doesn't. Security without honesty is just a prettier kind of trapped. Don't marry a life that looks right from the outside while you're quietly disappearing on the inside. You deserve someone who wants to know you, not watch you struggle. If this story hit something real for you, drop a comment below. Have you ever stayed somewhere comfortable that was slowly making you smaller? Let's talk about it.